Welcome back to the deep dive. We've gone through all the source material you sent us, and we've distilled it down into the most practical and honestly surprising insights we could find. And today, we're plunging into one of the great, well, counterintuitive truths of leadership: how to sustain humility and dependence as a daily practice. For your whole career, we looked at a whole stack of sources that are all grappling with this fascinating paradox. The very skills that make a leader successful, the confidence, the strategic thinking, the drive, those can actually quietly erode the very qualities that make them influential in the long run.
Things like humility and moral clarity.
Exactly. So our mission today is to get past the idea of surrender as this one-time dramatic event. We want to extract the real frameworks, the specific habits you need to build it into a lifelong architecture, a sustainable system, not just a feeling.
And this is, so critically relevant for you right now. The professional landscape is just moving too fast for what the sources call brittle leaders.
Brittle leaders, I like that.
Yeah. It demands resilience, adaptability, and a real moral clarity. Real influence today is relational. It's earned through trust, not just your position on an org chart. So leaders who don't maintain this intentional posture of humility, of surrender, they're really risking stagnation. They just become irrelevant because they stop listening.
Okay, let's unpack this core paradox right away, because it's a genuinely shocking claim. The sources suggest that leadership is most powerful, most effective, not when we clench our authority tighter, but when we intentionally surrender it.
Right, and this isn't weakness.
Yeah.
The sources are very clear on that. This is wisdom. It's the difference between your own self-generated effort and a kind of multiplied power. When leaders see surrender as just a singular moment, maybe, a powerful experience at a conference or something, they miss the long game. They can be strategically brilliant, super talented, but if that dependence fades, they become brittle.
That phrase, brittle leadership, it perfectly captures that idea of a polished exterior hiding this internal fragility.
Exactly. And that fragility comes from something we can call quiet drift. Leadership environments, they're inherently gravitational. They're constantly pulling you towards self-focus.
So it's not a neutral environment. It's actively working against you.
It is. It's pulling you off course, often without you even noticing it.
So what are those specific forces? What's pulling leaders off course every single day?
Well, we identified three big ones, three simultaneous pulls. First, just the sheer pressure of the job pulls you toward self-reliance.
Right. The feeling that it's all on your shoulders?
Yes, you feel that weight, and you convince yourself that you, and only you, have to carry it. Then second, the success that comes from good work. Well, that tempts you towards self-importance.
Making you think the results are all about your own brilliance.
Precisely. And not, a blessing or a bit of luck. And then when challenges inevitably hit, that's when the third pull kicks in.
Which is self-protection.
That's it. You start building emotional walls, deflecting criticism, avoiding any kind of vulnerability because it just feels too risky. If you're not actively fighting these three pulls, that essential foundation of surrender, that intentional dependence, it just quietly dissolves.
And the leadership might remain, but the influence becomes shallow. Okay, before we dive into the solution, we have to clear up the confusion around the word surrender. It carries so much baggage.
A huge amount.
The sources are so clear. Surrender is emphatically not capitulation.
That distinction is absolutely vital. Capitulation is giving up. It's abandoning your responsibility. Surrender, in this context, is giving God the authority. It's committing to his purpose for the effort.
So it's not passive at all.
Not at all. It's active engagement, often really intense focus, but it's rooted in humility and dependence. You can think of it like this. Surrender doesn't weaken your leadership. It purifies it. It removes your ego and your anxiety from the whole equation.
Okay, so if surrender is the goal, we have to talk about identity. Because the biggest mistake, according to the research, is when leaders unknowingly fuse their self-worth with their job title.
Yeah.
That little shift from I lead a team to I am a leader, it's subtle, but it's catastrophic.
It creates an incredibly fragile foundation. And we see it everywhere. A role is lost, and the whole identity just collapses. We talked about Daniel from the source material, the nonprofit director. He spent 11 years building this amazing organization from the ground up.
And then the funding shifted.
Funding shifted, his role was eliminated. And logically, he knew it was a budget decision, but his emotional reaction was so much more than just grief over losing a job.
What was the deeper loss for him?
He realized he was grieving the loss of who he thought he was, his self-worth, his meaning. It had all become dependent on the title, the meetings, the public visibility. His soul had latched onto the role as its source of being.
So without the role, he felt like he just disappeared.
He did.
That story really gives weight to the foundational framework they introduce to correct this drift. The leader as steward, not owner.
Yes. And that single transformation, it changes absolutely everything about how you see your work. It totally reframes your relationship with success, with resources, with failure. If you operate as an owner, you protect, you possess, you strive, because you think it all depends on you.
So failure becomes a personal devastation.
It does. And success just leads to pride.
Ah,
But the steward,
what does the steward do?
the steward listens. The steward obeys. The steward entrusts the outcomes to God. The focus isn't on possession. It's on faithfully doing the task you've been given. And when you really internalize that you are managing people and resources that ultimately belong to someone else, well, surrender becomes the most natural, stress-reducing response you can have.
It takes the anxiety of performance right out of it. If I'm not the owner, I don't have to carry the outcome alone. This also ties into prioritizing kingdom first, advancing God's agenda, not my own, and then measuring success by faithfulness over visibility.
Exactly. And think about what faithfulness over visibility means today. An owner chases fame, the applause, the big public win. A steward focuses on the integrity of the work, the small, unseen acts of service, the quiet consistency of character.
It lets you perform in the shadows with the same devotion you'd have in the spotlight. It's the key to getting out of that performance trap.
It really is.
And we see the consequences of these two identities played out perfectly in the historical contrast between Pharaoh and Moses.
Oh, absolutely. Pharaoh's the embodiment of control. His leadership was just rooted in self-exalting power. He refused to yield, even when the consequences were completely catastrophic for his people.
He became a prisoner of his own power.
He did, and his leadership just collapsed under the sheer weight of its own pride.
And then you have Moses, who is the complete opposite, the anatomy of surrendered authority.
He was reluctant, constantly pointing out his own flaws, but he relied entirely on divine instruction. He was one of the most powerful leaders in history, but his strength came from obedience and dependence.
So the contrast is clear. Self-anchored leadership eventually collapses, but surrendered leadership endures because its strength comes from, well, an external and inexhaustible source.
That's it. That's the core of it.
Which brings us to the crucial pivot point. Moving from this, this beautiful concept to the daily infrastructure you need to sustain it. We can't just rely on inspiration. We need architecture.
We have to move from theory to rhythm. Success here is built on structure, not just good intentions. The sources detail a kind of daily liturgy of surrender. It's 3 simple, ritualized habits that orient your heart. It starts with the habit of first moments.
Setting the compass before the journey begins.
Precisely. It means giving the first hours of the day, or at least the first conscious moments, to God. Through scripture, prayer, maybe just silence. It's a declaration, God, you lead today, I'm going to follow. It sets the tone before the noise of email and demands can pull you back into that self-reliant mode. It's what we see modeled by Moses and Jesus, who often withdrew early in the morning.
So once the workday starts, how do we keep that intention alive?
That's where the second habit comes in, the habit of recurrent check-ins. We can't just set it and forget it in the morning. These are micro moments throughout the day to recalibrate the heart.
Like an internal GPS correction.
Exactly. And a busy leader needs a practical cue, right? It can't just be general mindfulness.
So what's an example of a cue?
The sources suggest having a specific one, like a breath of surrender, before you open that tense email, or a silent prayer right before you walk into a crucial meeting. These small acts, they train your soul to surrender reflexively instead of reacting out of anxiety or ego. They build muscle memory for dependence.
And then finally, the bookend that protects us from burnout, the habit of evening release.
This is so critical. The leader intentionally lays down everything they carried that day. You reflect on where you might have drifted, and you return the unfinished work and all that anxiety back to God. This anchors your rest and trust. It's this daily cycle orient, recalibrates, release that really becomes the engine of sustainability for a leader.
And beyond those daily rhythms, the material points to a few spiritual disciplines that are like the infrastructure protecting surrender. Let's talk about the big 3, starting with silence.
Silence is incredibly powerful because the leadership environment is just so noisy. Silence breaks through that internal static, the voice of ambition, of fear, of your own strategies. It trains you to discern that gentle whisper of guidance over the clamor of your own mind. Without dedicated silence, you will inevitably drift toward your own solutions.
Right. And then there's the one that confronts self-reliance head-on, the one leaders find the hardest. Sabbath.
Sabbath is basically surrender in practice. It forces a weekly confession that God works even when you rest. For any high achiever, that confronts the deepest fear that the world will fall apart without them.
That without their constant management, things will spin out of control.
Exactly. Sabbath reminds your soul that God is the ultimate sustainer, not your activity. It forms leaders who aren't driven by scarcity or productivity guilt.
And lastly, to protect against that quiet drift into self-importance, there's confession.
Confession is the necessary antidote to leadership pride. It requires vulnerability, and it disarms pride before it can corrupt your influence and isolate you. Leaders who regularly practice confession, they stay grounded, they stay humble, and they stay receptive to correction. It keeps surrender personal and real, not just a theory you teach to others.
Okay, all of this sounds great, but it can feel a little abstract. The sources give us two very practical tools to turn this insight into infrastructure.
To do. First, they detail the 30-day surrender plan. It's designed as a kind of actionable experiment. For 1 month, you focus on 4 integrated things daily. Practicing a specific habit, like the check-in,
Okay.
engaging a reflective prompt about your identity, applying a defined leadership action like empowering someone on your team, and then anchoring yourself in a specific scripture.
So it's less about learning more information and more about installing new internal instincts.
Exactly. And for the long haul, they introduce the Surrender Leadership Dashboard. This isn't for tracking productivity. It's a tangible way to track alignment. You use it for quarterly reflection.
And it focuses on 3 core domains.
Yes. Prayer and spiritual disciplines basically was I-dependent. Obedience and decisions, did I follow God's known will? And servant actions and relationships, did I lead like a servant?
So this dashboard helps you spot that subtle drift before it becomes a catastrophic failure.
And we see the power of these tools in the results. Think of Elena, that ministry leader we looked at. She was incredibly effective strategically, but she was defensive, relying only on her own instincts. Her team turnover was really high.
And then she committed to just 10 minutes of silence every morning.
Just that, and a weekly Sabbath. And her whole presence shifted. Her team actually noticed before she did.
How so?
They said her listening became deeper. She would pause before speaking. Her influence became less about commanding and more about serving. Same for Michael, the CEO who integrated daily silence in the evening release. Surrender didn't make them less sharp or less effective. It made them healthier, wiser, and more grounded, which, in the end, actually expanded their influence.
They moved from transactional leadership to transformational stewardship.
That's a perfect way to put it.
That's a great summary. We've established that enduring leadership is rooted in dependence, not dominance, and it needs daily, intentional rhythms built on a sustainable structure.
And to connect all this to the highest authority, we have to look at the ultimate model of surrendered leadership, what theologians call the Christ pattern, or kenosis.
Kenosis, can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a Greek term that means self-emptying. In Philippians, it tells us that Jesus, though fully divine, emptied himself and took the form of a servant.
And how does that theological concept connect to practical leadership?
Well, kenosis in action is relinquishing the professional rights and privileges we feel we're entitled to. It demonstrates that obedience and humility are the truest expressions of power because they show complete trust. He surrendered the right to wield authority on his own terms in favor of God's.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that profound, counterintuitive insight that you, as a listener, have to internalize. The paradox holds true. Leadership influence expands not when we clench our authority tightly to prove we deserve it, but when we yield it willingly. The most powerful leaders are the ones who relinquish the right to lead on their own terms. So if you commit to these daily practices that declare your dependence, what areas of your leadership do you need to stop owning and start stewarding this week? That's the challenging but also liberating thought we want to leave you with today.